This is episode 2 of RC Workbench, and I will be replacing the, rebuilding the front diff of my Turnkey Trooper as soon as I remember what I'm supposed to be doing. So, first things first, you've got to remove the shock tower. Well, one of the first things is removing the shock tower. I'll cut ahead till the shock tower is removed. The shock tower is officially off. So now, next thing that one needs to do is detach the front bumper. Alright, so having done that, the bumper is now detached. You can flip the whole thing over, making sure that you haven't undone any screws completely so you don't lose them. Just got other rubbish falling out of it now. Undo these mounting screws. So I just got the last screw out. Now that bumper section is detached from the rest of the vehicle. The only things now holding it in place are a couple of screws just here, screws here. So, back these out. So now this entire front diff section can be removed, and I've got my aluminium front drive shaft in here as well, if I can get it out. There we are. Stuck in the outdrive cup. Anyway, so there we are. That's the front diff. So now to remove the diff, there we are. Diff out. Take the dog bones out as well, so you don't just drop them and leave them on the ground. So I'm just taking out the screws which hold the diff together. So you've got the in drive and two out drives coming into the diff, and I believe it's the gear on the in drive that's stripped this time, because the in drive was spinning without either of the out drives rotating, and it seemed like it was clicking. So I think I've stripped the in drive, which is good because I've got heaps of spares, because I've never stripped the in drive before, whereas I've stripped the out drive twice or something now. So that's what happens when you put power systems are designed for 1/8 cars into 1/10 cars. I did so understanding what the likely consequences would be. So yeah, no one to blame but moi. Alright, take the out drive off, bring that off, and no, I haven't stripped the in drive. So here, you got the in drive, you got the main diff. Pull the in drive out on the bench. Because it's this and not the in drive, you got to take the other out drive off, like so. Remove. Then you can remove your entire diff. There's a bearing on either side of this shell, so just be careful you don't lose that while you're doing your maintenance. Just doing that doesn't feel good. So what my Allen key tool, very useful those by the way, for a Phillips, and start undoing this. Whoa. Cutting forwards now, I have this gear here off, and instantly I can see that that's stripped, which is great. And that in there looks okay, but I'll replace these gears because they're a little bit stripped as well. The gear on the other side though is fine. So I will go and get my replacement parts and swap them over. Here I have the replacement outdrive gear and the replacement idler gears, or whatever you want to call them, on the inside there. This is like 60 cents from Hobby King. That's about 78 cents or something ridiculous, so dirt cheap, super cheap to replace. So you're going to take these idler gears out, put them over there for the time being. That gear in there is still fine, so I'm going to keep it. New idler gears can just be dropped straight in there and fit in like so. Remove that gear there. Now there should be a shim underneath it. It's important to get this shim out. If you replace the gear without putting this shim in as well, your gears will strip a lot faster, so make sure you get that shim. Then another thing, there's an O-ring there which seals your diff. Make sure that's in place as well. So that O-ring and the shim complete the seal and stop rubbish from leaking out of your diff. So that's what it should look like now. New gear, new idler gears, the original rear outdrive. This isn't really standard practice, using shock oil for in diffs, but I don't have any diff oil, so fill her up with a bit of 2000 weight shock oil. Give it a bit of a spin. Get as many of the bubbles out as possible. Align that. Hope your holes are aligned, which they weren't. Now they are. And start putting your gear screws here back in. So now with these in very close to all the way, I'm going to go around and finish tightening them up, doing opposites, remember, so that it tightens up properly. Now something that should be mentioned with these screws is because of their size and the head size, after about three rebuilds you're going to end up stripping the heads out, and so you'll have to buy a whole new thing for $3.50, which, at least for me, and I'm working on a bit of a budget as always, that's no big deal. So yeah, these don't last all that long. Oh yeah, and there's a bushing on either side which makes up the plastic so that it fits into the bearing properly. Should probably mention that. Now, have this here, make sure your bearing's still in place, and wham, in it goes, and you sit the other half and then on top. Making sure that bearing there is still in too. Over the top, that bush in there fits nicely into the bearing on either side, and then you can proceed to do up. So, all spinning nicely, all working well. I can now put my outdrives in place, put them on, and proceed to do them up. Now with these outdrives, you really want to do them up really tight, and then I will bring the car back over and go about putting it back in. So here we are, got the car back now. I'm about to install this diff here. And now one thing that's really important to remember when you're doing this is you don't want to have your diff around this way, because that means that your front and rear wheels will be spinning the opposite directions to each other when you get it going. Now it's pretty easy to see which way it's going to have to be around, because this gap in your chassis plate down here, which you can't see all that well, but that gap there is staggered to the right of the vehicle, facing forwards as if you're in the vehicle. So this diff has to be around that way. Another way of just checking is to make sure it's the opposite of the rear diff. So that will sit in place like that there. One of the first things to do is make sure you have your drive shaft in. So get your drive shaft in. You might need a pair of pliers or something to hold it so that you can extend it, get it into the drive cup on the other side, like so. Then you bring up your bulkheads and your bumper. Actually, I'm going to leave that drive shaft out for now. Get it into whatever bulkhead you've accidentally glued to your bumper, like I have, there first. And if you remember, put the dog bone in around then you can all shove that in, and it all pops in and sits in place nicely. Now your second one is a little bit more entertaining, or can be more entertaining I should say, because it looks like it's going to cooperate this time, touch wood. Alright, so here we are, got that second dog bone in, and I'll connect it up. So you squish it all in, make sure your diff's in place. Check that it's the opposite of the rear diff again, because it's really not funny when you make that mistake. I'm saying that from experience, unfortunately. Now you're probably wondering why I disconnect the shock tower. Well, there's two main reasons to that. One is so that you can spread your front diffs apart, which you kind of don't need, your front bulkheads apart, which you kind of don't necessarily need the shock tower off for that. But the other reason is when you're bolting back in position, if the shock tower's attached, it's putting tension onto your A-arms, your lower A-arms, and it's very hard to get it back into position neatly. So that's the main reason I have it disconnected. So now we're going to go back in the order that we did this. Took the screws out, just in the reverse order. So first things first are these 4 screws that hold on the upper fiberglass deck. Okay, so those 4 screws holding the front diff and bulkhead assembly to the upper deck of the car are all in place now. Now they're not completely tight, they're just in place. This gives me a bit more flex, a bit more slack to play with, and that means that I can get these ones underneath in more easily. So I have these 4 screws on the underside of the car all done up now. I'm going to flip it over again, and I'm going to screw back into place the front bumper best as I can. Just remember, one side is still all dodgy and not attached properly, but not all that much I can do about that. And then last but not least, I'm going to put the shock towers back on, and I'll cut to having it done. So now completely finished. We have front diffs, and you know what I've gone and done? I've forgotten to put in the front drive shaft. So as I said, it's always good to put it in at the start so you don't forget it, and sure enough I went and forgot it. So I now have to pull the front off a bit to put the drive shaft in, but I won't bother showing you guys that. Essentially, that's how you rebuild the front diff, and the same process is for the rear diff as well. Exactly the same process, except for the drive shaft is a bit bigger, and that's about it. The diffs are exactly the same, front and rear, just like the A-arms. They've made as many parts the same on this vehicle as possible, which is good in a sense, but also does mean that some of the parts aren't ideal for their application, but that's okay. If you like this video, please subscribe and stay tuned for more both repair videos, the build video of my 1/8 scale truggy, and running videos of both vehicles. Thank you.